We are on live. Please start.
Hello, and a very good afternoon to all of you who are joining us today here in this webinar titled Changing Dynamics in the Individual's Relation to Free Will, Reinterpreting Human Practice and Idea of Freedom in the Context of Pandemic 2020, organized by the Departments of English, Sociology, and Philosophy of Chandraketugarh, Sahidullah, Smriti, Mahavidyalaya. My name is Dr. Shraddha, and I'm an assistant professor of English at the organizing college, and I will be your host today. If my internet connection doesn't bail out on me, I hope it doesn't. I keep my fingers crossed. So first thing first, let me begin by extending a very hearty and warm welcome on behalf of the organizing committee to our honorable inaugurator, Dr. Pelikan Bhattacharya, Joint Director of Public Instruction, NGC and UGC, Department of Higher Education, Government of West Bengal. Our esteemed resource persons, speakers on the panel, Dr. Niranjan Goswami, Department of English, Chandraketugarh College, Dr. Pelikan Bhattacharya, Department of Philosophy, University of Calcutta, and Mr. Vibhash Bagchi, Department of Sociology, University of Burdwan. To our dear and honorable patron, our principal sir, Dr. Kumar Chattopadhyay, to all our colleagues, including the faculty members and the non-teaching staffs, the college administration bodies, and to all the students and participants, some of whom we know in person and many who are joining us from all over the nation, across various states, some even from abroad. I can't thank you enough from the bottom of my heart on behalf of the organizing committee that you have taken interest and decided to spend your valuable time with us here today. Thank you all and each and everyone for gracing this webinar with your precious presence. So before we delve right into the inaugural session, let me just briefly touch upon the ground for choosing this particular topic for this webinar. The core idea is a brainchild of my senior and beloved colleagues from the organizing committee, Dr. Shudeshna Biswas and Dr. Mili Dattopal from the departments of Sociology and Philosophy, respectively. When we were preparing the concept note, the first thing that popped into my mind is why suddenly all the American civilians are trying to get rid of the masks? Why are they saying that they don't want to, listen to what the government is telling? And why are they trying to shed off all the precautionary measures that are meant to safeguard them from the infection when the death rate was alarmingly skyrocketing? And the thing is that we cannot escape this particular image that we have of America, that people in America, people in Europe, they live more freer, they live a freer life, they enjoy way more liberty than we do. And it's not like the case of India, where in a very densely populated place, some 10 families have to get access to one bathroom. And sometimes even that is not the case. Nobody has access to that. So why terms like, or why things like social distancing, lockdown, quarantine are affecting the people of the white supremacy so much that they're so vehemently protesting against the government who is actually presumably trying to save their lives. Now, then I just thought that maybe the concept of freedom is more complex, more immediate, and more overpowering than that of imminent death. Is it possible that we fear not being able to shave our beard or have a haircut or have a tattoo or a body spa than we fear dying in the hands of an unknown virus? But that sounds absurd, doesn't it? But interestingly enough, this was not the case in America only. These protests were taking place all over the world, be it Iraq, Israel, Philippines, be it Nigeria, Ivory Coast, Kenya, South Africa, Zimbabwe, or France, Germany, Poland, Spain, Russia, UK, and to a certain extent in our own country as well. Violent protestations against the government's infiltration into the private personal space of the individual. So this virulent defense of personal freedom was becoming a matter for everyone in every country at the same time, in the same context, which I felt was kind of unique. And then, this might just sound random, I came across this series on Netflix because I had nothing better to do. It was called The Sinner, Season 3, and came across the reference to this term Übermensch. I am not pronouncing it correct, I know, but that's my German. Now, Übermensch is Nietzsche's idea of overman, about whom he talked to a great extent in his famous book, Das Pract Zarathustra. And something struck me. It's like the overman is basically an ordinary man turned rebellious against every authoritarian narrative. He is someone who exerts his will to power, commits to his freedom of choice very consciously in a world where he finds the orthodox, traditional, restricted, and homogenized ways of responding to the call of the free will very paralyzing, detestable, and abominable. Now, I just thought that, is this unprecedented global phenomenon, like a pandemic, which is happening for the first time in my life, in everybody's life, I'm sure, is this in any way, is this particular experience, which is constantly limiting and constricting and emaciating our personal practice of freedom, our own right to exert our own freedom, some way unleashing the Übermensch in all of us at once? So it is from there only the discursive body around the concept of human freedom formed and took its own shape. The theoretical perspectives around the heart of the problem has been already laid in the concept note, which I'm sure you all have read. So I will not go into the detail of that. But before we delve straight into the inaugural session, I would also like to make a very small request, my humble apologies in advance and in anticipation if I accidentally miss out some details, forget to mention something or mispronounce some very difficult words from the title of the upcoming papers, because I'm surrounded by so many acclaimed and esteemed academics, senior professors and scholars, even among the participants, I'm sure. So please forgive me and feel free to correct me. Okay then, I now request our Honorable Principal Sir, Dr. Sharaj Chattopadhyay, to give his welcome address, thereby inaugurating the inaugural session. Over to you, sir.
Thank you. Can you all hear me? A very good afternoon, everybody.
Yes,
on,
sir.
on behalf of the organizing committee of this webinar and our college, I welcome all honorable guests, speakers, and participants. Dr. Ramaprasad Bhattacharya, Joint Director of Public Instruction, will be with us, and he will inaugurate this webinar just after a few minutes. I know that it is very difficult for him to join with us because lots of files and papers are waiting for his attention, and we all want his quick attention. I am grateful to him for being with us, keeping aside his busy schedule. I welcome today's speakers, Dr. Niranjan Goswami, Chanded Nagar Government College, Dr. Pelikan Bhattacharya, Department of Philosophy, Calcutta University, and Professor Bivas Bagchi, Department of Sociology from Bardot University. I feel very proud that such eminent speakers are joining today with us. Thanks to our organizing committee for being capable of managing their consent of participation. Today's topic is extremely related to the field of social sciences. I have the least experience in those fields. But few words from the long title of the topic, like changing dynamics, free will, human practices, idea of freedom, I can follow and can feel. Most of the individuals of a society make the paths of their life with unimaginable constraints of necessity. They even cannot think about the words free will. So, have they any relation to free will? If not, we are concentrating only on a microscopic segment of our society. Honorable speakers, I am not presenting any contradiction or question of validity of the topic. In this context of pandemic, we can consider and discuss this subject because this is a real issue. I know our speakers can deliver a series of lectures only on a single phrase like free will, human practices, idea of freedom, etc. In Canada, USA, Britain, the data scientists and mathematicians are already started to survey and research on human practice, changing dynamics of socioeconomic pattern, and healthcare in the present context. We all are very much concerned with this topic selected for the today's session. Our speakers will enlighten us the overall changing situation of our society. We shall reach at some decisive and conclusive points on reinterpretation of human practices and idea of freedom. I again express my gratitude to all honorable speakers, guests, and my colleagues. Thank you all. Over to Shraddha.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for your address. Am I audible?
Yes, yes.
Okay. We have been very fortunate to have had worked under your patronage, sir. Do we have Rama Babu on our platform?
No, ma'am. No, ma'am.
No, no.
রমাবাবু একটা মিটিং আছে আমি ফোন করেছিলাম উনি
Achha.
পরে জয়েন
Okay.
করছেন
Okay.
So, according to the program schedule, we had another speaker, respected Sir Rama Babu, Rama Prasad Bhattacharya, but who couldn't join us till now because he's busy somewhere or for some technical interruptions. I'm not sure, but he will be joining us soon. So, I think it's time for us to delve right into the technical session one. That is, we should begin with our speakers' talks. Something that we have been waiting to listen to. Okay. So we are heading towards back-to-back 3 technical sessions, technical session 1, 2, and 3, comprising our 3 resource persons. First resource person on our panel, first speaker on our panel is Dr. Niranjan Goswami, sir. And I would humbly request Dr. Niranjan Goswami, sir, to take the lead. But before he does so, I would just say a very few words about him and his paper. Dr. Niranjan Goswami is an associate professor and the head of the Department of English at Chandraketugarh College, Hooghly. His areas of interest include the European Renaissance, Ramist rhetoric, Ciceronian and Senecan styles, Reformation thought, and early American Puritan sermons. He has published on Lorenzo Valla, Thomas Hobbes, Pietro Bembo, and Shakespeare. He has translated Terry Eagleton and Arthur Rebel from English and French, respectively, into Bengali. He was twice awarded the Charles Wallace India Trust Fellowship to the United Kingdom and was a Fulbright Nehru Senior Research Fellow during the span of 2010 and 2011 at Harvard University. We are extremely fortunate to have you on our panel, sir. The title of his paper reads, Aristotle's Dynamis and Pandemic as a State of Exception, an Approach Following Giorgio Agamben. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. Following Aristotle's discussion of dynamis or potentiality, particularly in his Metaphysics and De Anima, Agamben conceived of potentiality as the originary paradigm of freedom in his text on potentiality. 9 years later, he argues in Homo Sacer that dynamis provides the paradigm of sovereignty by which human freedom becomes extremely limited. Governments or states can exercise the sovereignty to bend the bodies of its subjects. In the name of sovereign good, they can do anything to people. Agamben borrows from Carl Schmitt the idea that the sovereign is someone who decides on the state of exception. The law is outside of itself, and the sovereign is outside the law. According to Dr. Goswami's observation, a pandemic may be conceived as a state of exception where the human body loses freedom over itself. It is quarantined, it cannot be touched, it is lost to one another. The fabric of society is torn apart by the psychosis of isolation, neurosis of washing of hands, distrust of our own breath, and finally the threat of annulment of ourselves, a morbid fear of comorbidity, a sense of loss and a paralysis of will. In his talk, he is going to focus on the pandemic as a state of exception, how our potentiality paradoxically leads to the loss of what was once thought as originary freedom. Can't wait to listen to you. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Shraddha. Very good afternoon, everybody. First, I thank respected principal, community board, Sahidullah Mahavidyalaya, and the organizers, the organizing committee of this webinar. I also say very good afternoon to my esteemed co-panelists from University and Bhagwan University, all the colleagues and all members of the audience. We are going to talk at length today on the pandemic. I am going to talk on the pandemic in a state of exception. Much of what I would say has been briefly already read out by Shraddha, but I hope this very thought-provoking topic chosen by the organizing committee will lead us into the intricacies of the matter. The title of my talk is Aristotle's Dynamis and Pandemic as a State of Exception. We are in the midst of a crisis with multiple ramifications: medical, social, economic, psychological, and ultimately philosophical. The coronavirus pandemic pushed us into a crisis so deep and broad that we started wondering not only about the ways of deliverance, but also what sparks and alterations in our psychic well-being it would leave us with. In such a scenario, we raise in this webinar the question if we are going to lose our freedom, our ease of life being constrained, hemmed in, and assaulted by this malady. The questions of free will and freedom, though not exactly the same, yet are mutually related. In the 15th century, the Florentine philosopher Pico della Mirandola, in his famous Oration on the Dignity of Man, had suggested that in the Neoplatonic chain of being, man's place is not fixed between angels and animals as was earlier suggested. Suppose man has the unique freedom of moving up and down the scale by virtue of his conduct. He can move up and be one with God, or be bestial, or even slothful like vegetables. This glorification of man by Pico was necessary because of the very strong kind of thought that looked at fallen man as a creature or a speck of dust. Pope Innocent III had expressed this idea in a treatise on the misery of man. During the Reformation, Erasmus and Luther famously clashed over the question of man's free will. Erasmus proposed that the doctrines of repentance, baptism, and conversion depended on man's free will, and the doctrine of predestination was in conflict with the teachings of the Bible. Luther, however, opposed the idea of free will because he thought that fallen man's will was incapacitated and man can do nothing to save himself, as God has foreordained who would be saved and who would be damned. Thus, the question of free will that was bound up with the issue of man's salvation remained intimately tied to theological doctrines up to the 17th century. Modern Italian philosopher Giorgio Agamben focused on the question of freedom in his essay on potentiality by taking into consideration Aristotle's discussion of dynamics of potentiality, particularly in his Metaphysics and De Anima. Agamben conceived of potentiality as the originary paradigm of freedom. 9 years later, he argued in Homo Sacer that dynamics provide the paradigm of sovereignty by which human freedom becomes extremely limited. Governments or states can exercise this sovereignty to bend the bodies of the subjects. In the name of sovereignty, they can do anything to do. Agamben borrows from Carl Schmitt the idea that the sovereign is she who decides on the state of exception. The law is outside of itself, and the sovereign is outside the law. Following Agamben, one may argue that the pandemic results in severe loss of freedom, as in a the fabric of society is torn apart by the psychosis of isolation, neurosis of washing of hands, distrust of our own breath, and finally, the threat of annulment of ourselves, morbid fear of comorbidity, sense of loss, and the paralysis of will. The human body is lose control over them, are quarantined, cannot be touched, and are lost to another. I will focus in this talk on the pandemic as a state of exception, how our potentiality paradoxically leads to the loss of what was once thought as originary freedom. But before we can follow Agamben's argument about freedom, we need to look at it more thoroughly. Taking up Aristotle's concept of potentiality, dynamics, and actuality, energia, Agamben argues that potentiality has been of central importance in Western thought, not only as a metaphysical concept, but also as a political concept, as potenza or power. He examines the expressions I can, posso, or I cannot, non posso, which raise the question about our faculties or powers and their limits. In De Anima, Aristotle wonders, how is it possible for sensation, aesthesis, to exist in absence, to exist in its absence, anesthesia? Though it is an aporia, sensation that can come into action only when there is a stimulus is conceived by Aristotle as a presence in absence. Similarly, Agamben comes to think that potentiality is not simply non-being, but it is the presence of an absence. Following Aristotle, Agamben states that potentiality has two modes. Impotentiality is a privation contrary to potentiality. Thus, all potentiality is impotentiality of the same and with respect to the same. This is actually a quotation from Aristotle. Agamben also argues that something can be also essere only in virtue of its inability to be, non posso essere or non-being. According to Agamben, this relation is the original structure of dynamics. In other words, potentiality has two modes: passing into actuality, not passing into actuality. For Aristotle, the examples of existent potentiality are arts and knowledge, leading to their power. But human power is violent and limitless with respect to other human beings, a point that Agamben takes up in Homo sapiens. Agamben argues that to be free is, in the sense we have seen, be capable of one's own potentiality, to be in relation to one's own privation. This is why freedom is freedom for both good and evil. The officer placed his knee on George Floyd's neck in the USA, activated his potentiality in removing the knee in order to exercise his state power. Homo sapiens, Agamben discusses the paragon of sovereignty as a problem of constituting power and its relation to constituted power. The sovereign state is the constituted power, which has been constituted by a constitution or a constituting power. Walter Benjamin, in a famous essay, explained that the relation between these two kinds of power is that between the violence that posits the law and the violence that preserves the law. Whereas the first is often revolutionary and progressive, think of the French Revolution, the latter turns into establishment and is reactionary. Think of the administration of Robespierre. Taking his cue from Benjamin, Agamben argues that the totalitarian state bans the constituting power and the constituent power abandons such a state. Such a state declares itself by upholding the exception over law. Then, in his thesis on the philosophy of history, the tradition of the oppressed teaches us that the state of exception in which we live is the rule. We must arrive at a concept of history that corresponds to this fact. Then we will have the production of real state of exception before us as a task. So we question, what is the state of exception? Agamben explains, but what properly characterizes the exception is that what is excluded in it is not, for this reason, simply without relation to the rule. On the contrary, the rule maintains itself in relation to the exception in the form of suspension. The state of exception is therefore not the chaos that precedes legal order, but the situation resulting from its suspension. This is a quotation from Agamben's potentiality. When I apply the concept of state of exception with reference to the coronavirus pandemic, I do it metaphorically. Imposition of punitive laws, restrictions on moving, talking, walking freely, going home or going to work, preventing actions that are the only means of finding a livelihood for many. One cannot ordinarily do this to people unless one declares a state of exception, an emergency, a crisis. Maheshwari Deswal listed the following corona-related laws in the Times of India on March 26. In our country, disobedience to quarantine rule is punishable under Section 271 of the Indian Penal Code 1860, with imprisonment of either description or term, which may extend to 6 months, or with fine or with both. Failure to take requisite precautions despite being aware of the possibility of the spread of such infection or disease is punishable under sections 269 and 270 of the IPC. Under section 269, whoever unlawfully or negligently does any act which is and which he knows or has reason to do likely to spread the infection of any disease dangerous to life shall be punished with the imprisonment of either description up to 6 months or fine or with both fine and imprisonment. Disobeying the norms prescribed for social distancing, coughing or sneezing, covering the nose and mouth, not wearing masks in public, disregarding norms for social isolation, loitering on the streets in groups, socializing in disregard of the prescribed regulations, etc., are all punishable offences under Section 270. India has invoked powers under the Epidemic Diseases Act 1897, control COVID-19. This Act is a 123-year-old legislation with the provisions that allow the state to inspect people traveling by railways, ships, air travel was not an option at the time when this law was enacted, and segregate suspects in hospitals, temporary accommodation or otherwise. 1.380 billion people of India have been embroiled in quarantine, restriction of movement as at sudden notice, leaving families separated, workers unemployed due to lockdown, transport stalled, the poor without food and ration, sick people without medical help, and students without the infrastructure of teaching learning. We know about the misery of migrant workers tracking thousands of miles on foot. By all definitions, we are in a state of exception. An exceptional exception. There's too many exceptions and too much imposition of rules. How does art cope with such a state? Is there a literary exception? Johann van der Waal raises this question and attempts to seek answers through reading of Paul Celan, Michel Foucault, and Italo Calvino in his paper, The Literary Exception, Reflections on Agamben's liberal democratic political theology and the religious destabilization of the political in our time. Celan, in Pelikan, speaks of an absolute poem that does not exist, and in which the tropes and metaphors want to become absurd. Foucault, in The History of Madness, speaks about work of art, opening a void, a question, a silence, transgressing meaning. Finally, quoting from Calvino's novel, On a Winter's Night, a Traveler, Van der Waal presents the idea of a
রঞ্জন স্যার বলছি আপনি একবার হেডফোনটা ছাড়া কথা বলবেন একবার, একটু প্রবলেম আসছে অডিও। হেডফোনটা যদি কম্পিউটার থেকে ওপেন করে নেন, ওরা একবার যদি কথা বলেন, একবার দেখে নিতে।
Finally, quoting from Calvino's novel, On a Winter's Night, a Traveler, Van der Waal presents the idea of the self-transcendence of literature
ক্লিয়ার
and
আছে?
the shift of literature from literary example to literary exception. Am I audible?
এবার বেটার আছে একটু, আপনি বলুন এইভাবে। থ্যাংক ইউ।
So this was Van der Waal's idea about literary example moving on to literary exception. I will not, however, follow in their tracks. Let us focus once again on the pandemic experience, verging on a theatre of the absurd. The first of the new normal, Noli tangere. Christ said this to Mary Magdalene after his resurrection, touch me not. Lovers cannot kiss, couples cannot hold hands, and friends cannot embrace. Suddenly, the sentiment of the lady in the Petrarchan love sonnet becomes universal, touch me not. We regress by nearly 700 years. Zizek has, of course, already quoted the Latin phrase in his latest book, Pandemic. Covering face with mask. A new criterion of judging social scale has arisen. Those with full PPE, those with face shield and mask, those with N95 masks, and others with surgical masks of 3 or 2 layers, those with cheap cloth masks, and those with no masks represent the range of the new rich and the new proletariat. A colorful mask industry has arrived. Here we may see masks with Lucknow chicken work, masks with artistic design, and masks with political and or religious emblems. In Florida, a group of women started a movement of rejecting masks. They reject masks for the same reasons that they reject underwear. Things need to be confined and you will be fine. Couples never imagined they would have to spend so many hours together after marriage. The law of diminishing returns strikes, and too much of companionship begins to be irksome. Marital disputes have increased as chances of domestic abuse. Professor Smriti Sen argued in a recent webinar that staying home does not mean staying safe for many girls. The books of the suicides in Dante's Seventh Circle in Hell is getting crowded, as there are an increasing number of suicides and a spot in mental diseases. Those who are depressed can find little help in the absence of chances of socializing friends. The shadow of schizophrenia in our early fractured society was never so deep. One can go on in this manner to describe the new normal. But for that reason, one only needs to switch on the television or read the newspaper to be convinced of the deterioration of our mental health in COVID times. It is not surprising that Albert Camus, in describing the plague, focused particularly on mental states of people. Here, Camus is using the word exile to mean a state of lockdown. I will quote briefly from the plague. It is noteworthy that our townspeople very quickly desisted, even in public, from a habit that one might have expected them to form, that of trying to figure out the probable duration of their exile. The reason was this: when the most pessimistic had fixed it at, say, 6 months, when they had drunk in advance the dread bitterness of those 6 months and painfully screwed up their courage to the sticking place, straining all their remaining energy to endure valiantly the long ordeal of all those weeks and days. When they had done this, some friend they met, an article in a newspaper, a vague suspicion or a flash of foresight would suggest that after all, there was no reason why the epidemic shouldn't last more than 6 months. Why not a year or even more? Hence, the collapse of their courage, willpower, and endurance was so abrupt that they felt they could never drag themselves out of the pit of despair into which they had fallen. Unquote. So we see here the stark resemblance of our situation when we cannot figure out the length of the lockdown. What most ails people in this situation is the state of uncertainty. Not only one's lifestyle completely changes during the pandemic, but one never knows the length of this altered exile state. The definition of freedom alters radically when even criminals do not feel free to commit crimes. People do not ask for treatment of other diseases in fear of visiting hospitals. Politicians do not feel free to cause disruptions in city life anymore. And pollution falls drastically because of closure of industries and lack of cars on the road. No crime, no pollution, no disease reported other than COVID, and no disruption. This is not a state of exception. What is? Whereas it is the task of economists to ponder how to restart the stalled financial engine of the state, we look at the deep sense of loss of our I can also, the loss of potential at a bare level. In the true sense, the pandemic forces us to experience a paralysis of our limbs and on our will. Whereas Dr. Liu in Camus' The Plague deeply faces the pandemic as he is encumbered by the onerous duty, other fellow citizens do not have the equanimity of the doctor. The suicidal character, Potter, finds himself in a tricky situation. His attempt to suicide had failed, only his life in a further state of jeopardy, because of the uncertainty and the fear of the plague. I quote briefly from the plague. At Potter's request, the doctor stopped his car beside one of the groups of children. They were playing hopscotch and making a great deal of noise. One of them, a boy with sleek neatly parted hair and a glowing face, stared hard at you with bright bold eyes. The doctor looked away. Standing on the pavement, Coulthard shook his head. He then said in a hoarse, rather labored voice, casting uneasy glances over his shoulder. Everybody is talking about an epidemic. Is there anything in it, doctor? People always talk, he replied. That is to be expected. You are right. And if you have 10 deaths, they will think it is the end of the world. But it is not that we need here. Yes? And what we need here? You asked, returning the child's mind. Abruptly, Coulthard gripped the door of the car, and as he turned to go, almost shouted in a rageful, passionate voice, an earthquake, a big one, to smash the. Of course, nothing like that happened, and the plane continued its relentless march in the city. The mad, desperate voice of Coulthard, like the silent shriek painted by Edward Munch, however, freezes in our memory as a mad assertion of human freedom through universal destruction. And the image drawn up by Mad Lear in Shakespeare's play of the destruction of the seeds of creation forever. Literature, then, is one way of coping with pandemic. In Coming and Sartre, pandemic is often a symbol of corruption or putrefaction in the body politic. In view of the German occupation of France, these writers are forced to take recourse to such public method to insinuate the absurdity and uncertainty during the occupation. In Sartre's The Flies, the epidemic in Argos is not only remote in place but also in time. The mythological distancing was, however, no hindrance for the resistance to realize the parable of the representation of the Nazi oppression and its aftermath through the tyrannical rule of Aegisthus, who usurped power by killing Agamemnon with the help of his closet Clytemnestra. Orestes comes and takes revenge, thus accomplishing what Electra did not succeed in doing so far. Like the rats in Camus' The Plague, here the flies are made visible. They loom large and make life of the people miserable. Whereas they reify the pestilential epidemic, Sartre gives them a twist by making them the furies, which are raging in Argos as a punishment of the citizens' complicity in the murder of the king, and to disappear when Orestes accomplishes the revenge. It is evident that epidemic appeared as a central motive in the context of Nazi occupation in Camus and Sartre. In an unpublished screenplay, Typhus, published by Seagull Books, Sartre presents an existential situation where a group of Europeans are fleeing a city in Malaysia from the typhoid epidemic in a bus. The Malay, who is infected, gets up on the roof of the bus, creating a case of conscience, whether to take him along or to force him out of the bus. The Malay loses so much blood that the windscreen is all covered with it. Finally, one passenger and the driver get up on the roof and bring him down. They leave after leaving the body on the roadside. One may interpret the horrible scene in many ways. Political, ethical, and post-colonial interpretations immediately present them to the mind. However, for Sartre, this must have been a question of existential freedom of choice and bad faith, like Orestes' existential choice about joining Electra's cause in The Flies. From the drama of repulsion, revulsion, and nausea of Sartre, let us divert our look to a different European representation of pandemic, but the central character dies of an insatiable thirst of beauty. Thomas Mann's Death in Venice. In a strange drama of artistic appreciation intermingled with love for a beautiful boy, a theme much popularized by Andre Gide, in the context of an epidemic in Venice, Gustav von Aschenbach reminds one of Mom's The Lotus Eater. Aschenbach is so much absorbed in his love for the Polish boy who looks like a Greek god that he neglects all the signs, hints, and official suppression of an epidemic that keeps claiming lives. Even though he feels unwell in the weather and decides to be, yet he somehow comes back to extend his joy of seeing the boy. I quote briefly from Aschenbach's Daydream or Reverie from Death in Venice. The stream trickled crystal clear over smooth pebbles at the foot of the great spreading tree. The crickets made their music, but on the grass which sloped down gently so that one could hold up one's head as one lay, there reclined two men, sheltered here from the heat of the noonday. One elderly and one young, one ugly and one beautiful, the wise beside the desirable. And Socrates, wooing him with witty compliments and tests, were instructing Phaedrus on desire and virtue. He spoke to him of the burning tremor of fear which the lover will suffer when his eye perceives the likeness of eternal beauty. He spoke to him of the lasts of the profane and base who cannot turn their eyes to beauty when they behold its image and are not capable of reverence. He spoke of the sacred terror that visits the noble soul when a godlike countenance, a perfect body appears to him, of how he trembles then and is beside himself and hardly dares look at the position of beauty and reaches him, and would even sacrifice to him a graven image if he did not fear to seem foolish in the eyes of men. Unquote. Aschenbach, in his unconscious, identifies himself with Socrates, the apogee of Greek learning, and Tazio, the Polish boy, as Phaedrus. It is evident that his intense worship of him as a quality of mind and the supernatural youth. What is the lesson then? Must we be absorbed in an intense dream and aesthetic contemplation? Can writing and the arts provide us with temporary solace and shelter? Can an overwhelming passion for literature override the shadow of death? Why doesn't Aschenbach flee? Can our passion for the arts and beauty overcome the fear of death? Can we extract this lesson from 1,000 years of European history? Now next, look at death askance with full focus, love and beauty. Thank you.
শুভ্রা ম্যাডাম আছেন? শুভ্রা ম্যাডাম আছেন?
হ্যাঁ,
একদম।
হ্যালো,
হ্যাঁ, প্লিজ কন্টিনিউ ম্যাম।
আমি কন্টিনিউ করব?
ইয়েস ম্যাম।
ওকে,
নিরঞ্জন স্যার ছেড়ে দিয়েছে।
ওকে। Am I audible and visible both?
ইয়েস ম্যাম, কন্টিনিউ।
Thank you, sir. Thank you for your wonderful talk. It was so enriching to have all that information about how the problematized relation between human freedom and the government sovereignty has been at the core of every society, body polity, throughout the evolution of human civilization. This also helps me to understand the reason why people from almost every place, irrespective of the country's geopolitical location, in the map of the new colonial power equation, are all raising their voice against the sovereignty of the government. Thank you so much. Thank you once again. I would now like to request our participants to kindly start posting their questions and queries specifying the name of the latest speaker, and we will get back to those questions at the interactive session. May I also request the audience and the participants to please keep your microphones on mute, and if you're having any difficulty hearing what our speakers are saying, please would you use your own headphone. I think that would solve the problem to a certain extent. And yeah, thank you. So having said that, we will move on with our next speaker. We have on our panel our next resource person, Dr. Pelikan Bhattacharya, who is an associate professor in the Department of Philosophy at University of Calcutta. His areas of interest include political philosophy, ethics, existentialism, and philosophy of mind. He has close to 20 publications to his credit, which include environmental ethics and consumer society and a Marxian interpretation of subjectivity. He has also co-edited 2 books titled Some Essays on Utilitarianism and Epistemic Problems, Some Reflections. For today's talk, Dr. Bhattacharya's topic is Man is Condemned to be Free, Authenticity and Absurdity. Here he makes an observation that freedom is both man's greatness and grandeur. It is not a property, but a process of self-making. Authenticity lies in our inestimable capacity to interpret the world, in giving meaning and value to our situations. But the question is, does freedom foster necessity? Is it caught between nature and transcendence? Is it finally absurd? And if it is, how can we deal with this absurdity? A series of very potent inquiries into the heart of the problem narrated in the concept note of the webinar. Let's hear it from him. Over to you, Dr. Bhattacharya.
Thank you. Am I audible? Am I audible?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. You're audible.
Okay. Thank you, respected principal sir, respected professors, senior teachers, dear colleagues, friends. I'm so grateful to this college, to the organizers for inviting me on this occasion to share my views in this webinar. We all know that this is not an easy time. Our sleep is racked by nightmares of what the future holds for mankind. The freedom seems to be extremely incomprehensible, and we are at a loss what to do. We are housebound, we're isolated. Now, in this situation, in this pandemic situation, therefore, I'm reminded of a great novel by Franz Kafka, The Trial, where we see that the character, the person Joseph K., is arrested and prosecuted by a remote and inaccessible authority, with the nature of his crime revealed neither to him nor to the readers, even not to the author himself. Now, keeping this in mind, in this pandemic situation, I'm always thinking that in this situation that is given to us, suddenly one fine morning we get up and we find ourselves housebound, isolated, and we really don't know who is the authority behind this confinement. And therefore, the authority, as Joseph K. felt once, seems to be remote and inaccessible. We have no access to the authority. Therefore, in view of this pandemic situation, I decided to choose the topic that is, I'm condemned to be free, authenticity and absurdity. And obviously, it is needless to say that this paper or this lecture has been framed from the perspective of existential ontological perspective, which seems to be very practical at this situation and very significant also. Now, it is true that once, in the 18th, 19th century beginning, a Danish existential thinker, Soren Kierkegaard, once put that the tremendous thing which has been given to human being is freedom. And much before Kierkegaard, it was Immanuel Kant in Germany who said that being a human being, everybody is free. Everybody should have freedom, should enjoy freedom because I'm a human being. And as the coordinator has also mentioned, that it was also Nietzsche after that in Germany who had emphasized on the concept of Superman, on the concept of Overman, on the concept of willpower. Now, in connection with this anthropocentric tradition, in connection with this anthropocentric turn in philosophy, it was Jean-Paul Sartre in France who had asserted that man is condemned to be free in a universe which is almost godless. We are really raising questions at this time that is there really the God who can suffer along with the men? I'm talking about the suffering God, the God who suffers with all the people, with all the human beings. Now, for the time being, if we consider that this, this universe is in this sense godless, there is no suffering God in that sense, then what will be our status? What will be the status of our freedom? So it was the assertion that from the existential ontological perspective that man is condemned to be free. Freedom is man's greatness. Freedom is man's grandeur. And therefore, there is no choice apart from being freedom. We know that we are free to act, free to say, free to do, free to change the world, the entire world. And we are also responsible to the world that seems to be also my creation. So we are responsible for everything in that sense. We're responsible for the starvation. We're responsible for the oppression. We're responsible for the war. We're responsible for the unfreedom. Perhaps we're responsible for this pandemic situation. So from this perspective, if we start really, that freedom doesn't seem to be our property. We may have or we may not have. In that sense, we cannot consider freedom at all. Rather, freedom is an ontological, structural condition of our being. That is, freedom is an ongoing process of self-making on the basis of ongoing choices and decisions. Whatever our practical limitations are, for example, our genetic code, our socio-economic condition, our cultural background, our religion, even this pandemic, it is to be believed that they cannot determine, they cannot undermine my freedom. So we have to become self-making beings responsible for the meanings that we ascribe to the world, that we ascribe to our deeds, that we ascribe to our situations through our autonomously chosen activity. Therefore, this freedom is not any mentalistic pattern. This is not something extremely mentalistic. This freedom also is not, I'm talking about the freedom that today I'm talking about in view of the pandemic situation is not at all that positive freedom, which means that to obtain whatever we wish, to get whatever we wish to have, if we really can get or do whatever we want to wish or whatever we wish to have, that is not actual freedom. That is rather the denial of the freedom. Because from this perspective, we should not live at the mercy of our wants. Freedom is not simply responding to our passing whims and desires, to our passing whims and wants. moving in one direction to another based on the strongest impulse. I remember that once Dostoevsky, in one of his epoch-making works, that is The Brothers Karamazov, he described such freedom as the self-destructive bondage. In view of the pandemic situation, if we look back, our past days, for the last 30, 40, 50 years, we can see that we have identified freedom with this self-destructive bondage. In view of the consumer culture, market economy, we are considering every moment that our freedom is nothing but just whatever we want to have, just getting that. So to have has been identifying with freedom, not to be. Now the time is there, the time is ripe for making a fundamental distinction between having and becoming, between to be and to have. The self-destructive bondage, as Dostoevsky once said, it is, it is so practical that freedom has been taken in that sense, because in this pandemic, every moment we understand that we have been able to reduce all our necessities, all our needs. We can understand that for the last several years, we were suffering from overconsumption. That is very much clear for us today. And somehow all these aspects, overconsumption, hankering after excess, they have been identified with the notion of freedom. And this is really a misinterpretation, misconception of freedom. Therefore, just on the opposite side of this self-destructive bondage, I always say in Bengali, we have become Ahankari Kritodash. So if we really stay away from the situation, we have to concentrate on this authentic freedom, that is freedom of intention. Even in subaltern history today, we are comparing between two types of history. One is the history of economy and the other is the history of consciousness. Therefore, authentic freedom, as it is important in my discussion today, that freedom is freedom of intention in that sense. What is that? It is an inescapable capacity to interpret the world, to giving meanings and value to our situation on the basis of our choosing, on the basis of our decision making, and also to, which is more important in this situation, to see life, to understand our life through the anxiety of freedom, to understand of life through the anxiety of our own death. Therefore, freedom is not living at the mercy of wants. Freedom is not excuse of desires. Freedom is therefore is that kind of understanding which makes me able, or which makes me able to reflect on my situation through my understanding. And this relates us to our consciousness, to our understanding. Consciousness means, as I've said, freedom means freedom of intention. And consciousness is something which always goes beyond itself, which is essentially related to a kind of rejection. So whenever we talk about freedom in the sense of self-making, it is always a kind of self-annihilating. It is a kind of self-rejection or self-annihilation. What kind of rejection? If we really, for the time being, don't want to focus on any metaphysical understanding of that, at least we can see that here self-annihilation means a kind of rejecting interpretation. I have every moment, I have freedom, or I am free to reject the interpretation. So self-annihilation is a kind of rejecting interpretation. Self-annihilation is a kind of rejecting my present situation. I have the possibility of becoming something else. Therefore, authentic freedom, which seems to be so relevant in this pandemic situation, is a kind of becoming, is a kind of continuous emergence, I should say. I am perpetually caught between being and non-being. So I'm never complete. I was never complete. I am never complete. I am not something which is decided, but I am the being which has to decide it. Therefore, this authentic freedom is necessarily, obviously related to a kind of self-negation, as I've said, and it is a movement leading to self-negation, self-effacement. It is tied up with essential negativity, and it is a famous quote of Sartre, made in his being and nothingness, that I am the being what I am not, and I am not the being what I am. Therefore, authentic freedom is a fact. Next point I'm come. It is a fact. It is a fact means we are not free not to be free. We are condemned to be free. Every moment we have the possibility of being something other than what we are now at this moment. Thus, this authentic freedom turns out to be the radical authentic freedom. This freedom has a radical dimension. It has a radical dimension. What does this mean? It means that this freedom does not mean, it never means that there are no limits. There are no constraints of, to my on the ways we act. It doesn't mean that there is no limits to my freedom, because I'm not the perfect being. I'm not the perfect being like God. Once Tagore said that in his Religion of Man, that he's that means God's play, his play is within bonds. Therefore, he and we are, since we are bound, we hanker after freedom. And he's already, his play is within bonds. He is essentially free. God is essentially free. Therefore, his play is within bonds. And we are essentially bound. Therefore, we hanker after freedom. So, it has got some radicality. And it never means, as I've said, that there is no limits to our freedom. But all the limits, all the constraints, they gain their meaning, achieve their meaning from us, from our choices, from our decisions. So there are infinite number of meanings of any situation. Now the problem appears, now the problem crops up, that there are infinite number of meanings of any situation, or any situation can have infinite number of meanings. And the question is there anything ultimate that can compel me to interpret things in the way rather than another way? Freedom is thus invariably accompanied by our anguish, our forlornness. And moreover, freedom means also the burden of responsibility. Therefore, freedom is always associated with anguish. If we want to really be free, we cannot escape anguish. Therefore, the whole thing ultimately boils down to the fact that freedom is continuous flow of to be and not to be. There is no limit to not to be. Therefore, there is no limit to freedom. And from this perspective, it is said that there is no ready-made, predetermined nature or pattern of this. Because otherwise, if there were really any predetermined nature of that, then we would not have the sense of not to be. But we always feel that there is a sense of not to be. Our consciousness always reaches out to the outside world. it always flows outside. It always intends some external object. It is always intentional, to speak philosophically from the phenomenological standpoint. But now, if we really conceive freedom in this way, this radical, authentic freedom, along with this anguish, along with this discomfort, there are basically many problems in view of this. But I would like to mention here, because of time constraint, only two problems. First problem is that freedom is given in a situation and it gets limited. Thus, each of our acts can be interpreted in two ways. One is the situation and the other is the freedom. One is the situation and the other is the freedom. Now the problem is that there is the problem of the overall unity of our freedom. And here the absurdity seems to appear. What is that? This is the first problem, as I've said. Freedom is the, as I've said, that freedom is the constant possibility of being something other than what we are now. But on the other hand, is there not a fundamental freedom governing all our particular acts, governing all our particular choices? Even this question was raised by different thinkers throughout the ages, right from Kant up to the postmodern thinkers. Even Sartre had mentioned this problem in his book, Being and Nothingness. So the question is that, is there not over and above all the particular project, a general project, which is the project of our life? If the question is yes, then we would be committed to the idea of timeless freedom, as it was mentioned by Plato in his book Republic, or in many of his writings in ancient Greece. Even Kant had also tried to assert this kind of freedom, although Kant was the, as I've said, was the exponent of autonomy, which had influenced all the later thinkers up to this postmodern period, who have tried to build up any theory of freedom in this context. Therefore, this is the first problem. This is the first kind of problematic issue, which seems to appear. Now, secondly, another problem there is that is freedom seems to be self-destructive. What is that? We have said that, even Kant had said that freedom, as human being, I am free. Kant had made a very crucial distinction between freedom and independence, as he had made a distinction between moral freedom and political freedom. I'm not going into those things today because I don't have that time. So let us be brief and to the point. What I want to say here is that freedom seems to be self-destructive. That is, freedom is due to our nature. Our nature is to be free. As a human being, I am free. Freedom and being human is identified with being free. But if we really notice on this issue, we can find out that it is also contrary to our nature. It is our nature at the same time. It seems to be contrary to our nature, because because it must continuously try to struggle against its own inner tendency towards petrification, towards transformation. We have a tendency to be an object. We cannot always use freedom. That's very true. So it is our nature to be free. Again, it also goes against our nature, because continuous try to struggle against his own inner tendency towards petrification. Now the question is as I've raised before, that does freedom then end in failure? Does freedom then foster necessity? Is it true that freedom is actually caught between nature and transcendence? Because on the one hand, it seems to be that there is impossibility of attaining transcendence. On the other hand, there is an endless hankering after this. So where do we stand in view of this puzzle? The absurdity obviously appears. When does absurdity appear? Absurd arises out of the conflict between our search for meaning and the apparent random nature of the meaninglessness of the world. As Joseph Kerr in the trial of Franz Kafka understood, he faced that incomprehensible nature of justice. We are also facing that incomprehensibleness. And absurdity appears thus. We are searching for the meaning, we are searching for the freedom, but freedom appears to be a failure. So, then even absurdity, there has been so much literature on absurdity. We know, everybody knows, from Waiting for Godot of Samuel Beckett to many other else. I'm not describing that. So this absurdity, along with the understanding of freedom, seems to be very, very real. This absurdity is not, I'm not talking about absurdity, any type of romantic spirit or something like that. No, it's a very reality of our life. Whenever we try to understand freedom, we have to face this type of absurdity. Now, finally, my final point is that in view of this absurdity of related to our understanding of freedom of intention, freedom of choice, whatever we say, there are three things. Once Camus had said that three basic consequences we may have in spite of this absurdity. In this lecture, I never want to say that absurdity is a dead point, is a dead end. Some thinkers might say that absurdity is a dead end. You cannot move forward after that. But in this today, I am not asserting that. I want to say that absurdity is not a dead end. We can move on in spite of this absurdity in the context of freedom. There are three things I have borrowed from Camus, the great philosopher and also the novelist. One is my freedom, second is my revolt, and third is my passion. These three are interrelated. And it is so nicely, if we really, we can discover this art of living in our life, that freedom is actually has to be turned into the love of life. Freedom is nothing but the love of life. And there will be love of life when there is despair of life. So absurdity should not become a dead end, as I've said. It arouses a sense of revolt, what I want to say. And this revolt also a kind of passion that can be fruitful, that is workable. How is it that? This is not in only Western paradigm, Western philosophical context. This can also be found, I think, also in Indian context. What is that? Impenetrable absurdity. When I'm understanding, when I'm experiencing the impenetrable absurdity, this impenetrable absurdity might lead to greater sincerity. The time for understanding our sincerity, which is the need of this hour, I think. How can we explain sincerity? There are 4 marks of sincerity I want to tell on this occasion today in my lecture. First of all, to be frank. We have to overcome falsehood. We have to overcome all kinds of pretensions, hypocrisy. We have to be frank. Second, we have to be free, self-expression. That is very, very, very understand. Those people are slaves who cannot express themselves. Slave are not someone who are, traditionally called slave. Slave are those people who cannot express themselves. We should not be slaves. As I've said, in this consumer culture, we have reduced to, in Bengali, I have said, ahankari kritodash. I use this particular word. Sublimated. We have become sublimated slaves. Now we have to overcome that. Third, to be courageous. We have to be courageous. And fourth, finally, all these culminate to the point to love. All the great thinkers in West, in Indian context, all have explained this love. Whenever, even Gandhi, when he tried to explain freedom, his final point was that this love. When Buddha had explained, his final point was that compassion. So this needs to be expanded. This needs to be cultivated. So I'm talking about this type of sincerity in our time. One thing I would conclude by saying that even in Gita, if we go to Gita, when Sri Krishna gives advice to Arjuna, when he was reluctant to fight against the Kauravas. Why? Because there was lack of sincerity in Arjuna. There was lack of sincerity in Arjuna. Arjuna didn't want to fight against the Kauravas, not because of Saptaguna, not because of his understanding of international peace, not because of his understanding of greater humanity or any kind of spirituality. He didn't want to fight against the Kauravas because he was suffering from tamas, tamaguna. Under the influence of tamas, he didn't want to fight again. So he was lacking sincerity. And what did Sri Krishna say? Klaibang mashma damo partho naintakta jupa paddate khudrang hridaya dadballang taktu tishta parantapa. And all these characteristics were also mentioned by Vishwa, giving advice to Yudhishthira in Anushasana Padma, that the person who wants to be that Superman considered by Nietzsche, the person who wants to enjoy authentic freedom, the person who wants to assert himself or free himself, he must have all these characteristics. He needs to assert. I'm not going into Mahabharata because shortage of time. So Arjuna did not have that kind of sincerity. He was not sincere. He didn't want to fight because of his gross attachment, because of his tamas prabhava, tamas influence. Therefore, he was lacking sincerity. Today, we are lacking sincerity. Today, we are lacking that courage. Today, we are lacking that self-expression. Today, we are lacking that kind of, I should say, frankness. Today, we are lacking how to love others. Therefore, I remember that poem. I think there are many from also literature who knows better than me. The W.H. Auden's poem, September 1, 1939. The last three lines says that hunger allows no choice to the citizen or the police. We must love one another or die. The situation is that we must love one another or die. We must love our nature. We must love other people. We must love the other, or we have to die. So this is what I wanted to say in view of freedom, that ultimately whenever we talk about freedom, even in this pandemic situation, freedom must turn out to our love. Freedom must turn out to self-expression. Freedom must turn out to caring, to love, to others, to nature and all this, because somehow or other, this situation, this pandemic situation, behind this pandemic situation, behind this isolation, behind this confinement, somehow we are responsible because we have been considering our freedom as self-destructive bondage. Thank you so much. I'm so grateful to you. Thanks. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much, sir. Am I audible?
Yes.
Am I audible and visible? Hello?
Hello. Hello.
Yes, ma'am. Continue, please.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. Okay. Thank you so much, Bhattacharya for such an engaging talk. We are certainly going to remain engrossed over the compelling observations you made in your talk. I was listening to you very passionately, and because you were talking very passionately, and I got reminded of this line by Kafka where he says that I am free and that is why I'm lost. It sounded like an anxiety. It always sounds like an anxiety statement. So can it be the case that in order to, it's not my question, I'm just trying to understand. Can it be the case that in order to bypass our responsibility in thinking more consciously about becoming, in enabling ourselves to invest our intentions into becoming, that we start treating freedom as synonymous to an inherent right or a kind of given associated with being, because we don't want to undertake the journey from being to becoming, like a coping strategy or defense mechanism. So maybe a lot of food for thoughts for the upcoming lazy days. Thank you so much for your talk. May I please request the participants to post their questions regarding Dr. Pelikan Bhattacharya's paper, and we will get back to those questions at the interactive session. Thank you. Next, it is time to move on to our last technical session, that is technical session 3, with our final speaker today, Mr. Vibhash Bagchi. Mr. Vibhash Bagchi is an assistant professor of sociology at University of Parganas, West Bengal. His research interests include engaging with critical social theory in the global south and a dialogue between sociology and psychoanalysis. He has presented papers at numerous international conferences, including Association for Psychosocial Studies conference held at Bristol, UK, and LUC in Asian conferences held at Taipei and Singapore. He was a postgraduate researcher at Brunel University, UK. Today, the title of his talk is going to be on Unfreedom in Freedom. Freedom in human lives becomes meaningful only in the face of constraints and unfreedom. In his lecture, he's going to touch upon what exactly constitutes a sociological understanding of freedom or free will, the status of freedom in late modern society, and the suggested relationship, if there is any, between the COVID pandemic and freedom. Thank you for choosing to be on this panel, sir, and over to you.
Good afternoon, everybody. Am I audible? Am I audible?
Yes, sir.
Good afternoon, everybody. And I'm very thankful to the organizers for giving me the opportunity to present in this webinar. Let's start with an anecdote. One of my students who belonged to the minority religion didn't find a rented accommodation in the Bardhaman town. She was going from pillar to post, came down screaming to me that nobody is allowing me a rented accommodation in Bardhaman town. I start this lecture with this particular anecdote. Freedom is sometimes painful. Freedom is sometimes scary. Freedom is the desire to come out of oppressions. But we all know how much freedom do we cherish in our everyday lives, but it always slips from our hand. So starting from the basic level of freedom in everyday life, everyday situations, our pain, anger, sorrow, desire and its frustrations. I will touch on 3 topics here in this lecture. First one, what is a sociological understanding of freedom? 2, what is the status of freedom in today's late modern times or late modern society, within quote. Third, is there any relation between the COVID pandemic and the question of freedom? So let us come to the first point. What is the sociological understanding of freedom? Sociologically, freedom means action which are voluntarily endured, free action, chosen action on my part, which is not constrained by any compulsion, constrained by any external authority, which compel me to do this, or might be even some inner compulsions. The last one is a bit tricky. What is the relation between freedom and passion, freedom and drives? This will be an extremely interesting topic to follow, and we remember not fight. But I won't go into that detail, into the tricky kind of socio-psycho discussions. Let us accept this basic premise that freedom is a course of action which is voluntarily chosen, freely chosen, unhindered by external compulsions or even internal compulsions. This is a basic premise of sociological definition. The conception of free will, we all know, as a theological referent. Free will basically started from the early Christianity. God has condemned us to be free. Now it's our decision to choose between immorality, sin, or moral actions. That is service to the God. It is our responsibility. That is a basic genealogy of this term free will as a theological connotation, but again, I will not deal with that. Let me come back to my own turf, which is sociology. So what I want to emphasize that freedom is not an abstract thing. Freedom is concretely embodied. Freedom is that which is concretely embodied in our everyday lives. My freedom to love, my freedom to choose my partner, my freedom to marry someone who is my partner, whom I love, freedom to get a decent wage, freedom to get free medical services, freedom for the women to walk around in the midnight without accompanied by any men, the freedom of gay people to choose their gay partner. These are all very, very concrete embodiments of freedom. We can see freedom stands in oppose to certain constraints, certain coordinates of unfreedom, which oppresses us. A few historical examples. I won't be dealing with history. The Spartacus revolt, slave revolt, spoke of freedom, freedom from slavery. The early bourgeoisie's freedom, right to freedom, was a freedom from nobility and monarchy and the church, leading to the French Revolution. And India, the freedom of, in Bengal, the 19th century women's freedom was basically freedom to educate so that they may be liberated from domestic slavery. These are all historical examples of freedom. Freedom is concrete, freedom is embodied. Now let us again come back to some micro issues again, micro sociological dealings. Do you enjoy absolute freedom, singular freedom? No, simply because we are always a member of the group. We have a group membership. We are a member of the society and group. There are certain norms and values which we have to follow. We're not responsible for the norms and values. It was handed down before to us through generations, through history. We are not responsible for their choice and construction. So basically that we are a group member that compromises our freedom. We live in a network of relationships driven by norms and values. Network of relationship means I'm dependent on my parents, dependent on me, their emotional dependence, their love dependencies. Children love their parents, and a whole host of networks of relationships, I say affective relationships, might be compromised in case of exercise of freedom. It might be that they are at loggerheads. It might be that my commitment and love to my partner might be at loggerheads with my exercise of freedom. So that's not merely an individual freedom, but we always exist within a kind of group membership and a network of relationships. Plus, there might be social pressures, tremendous social pressures. My exercise of freedom might invite rumors. My exercise of freedom might invite gossips throughout. So many people, on the streets and around and the shop, around the street corner might be very, very excited if I exercise my freedom. So all this you see, they act as a compromising situation to my infinite exercise of freedom. But again, freedom differs from society to society. I can't simply go for a live-together relationship in Calcutta. Simply not. Because I have been so much ostracized. There will be so much social pressure. But in London, it's not a problem. In London, you can just, if you decide to go with your partner, you can do that. In a live-together relationship, it's not possible in Calcutta. In Calcutta, while I'm walking down the road in my part of, as I do, sometimes even a stranger kid, like 3 years old, I can pick her up, pick him up, cuddle, no problem. His mom or father might only laugh. But if you do this in London, you're just expecting very stringent police action. You see, the coordinates of freedom and constraint differs from society to society, differs from culture to culture. That is not and therefore it's different spatio-temporally. We cannot simply compare one freedom with the other. There is no case of delete, refuse to collect water, obviously, in any other parts of the world. So you see the whole coordinates really differ from one society to another. So what I said significant is that freedom is embodied and concrete. Freedom is compromised sometimes with affective relationships. And thirdly, freedom varies spatio-temporally from society to society, from culture to culture. Now this is about a sociological understanding of freedom. Quickly, I want to move into my next topic, freedom in late modern age. As you all know, this has already been placed by Professor Bhattacharya, just I'm repeating that. Today's freedom is consumer culture, consumer freedom. In this late modern age, what is hegemonic, what is dominant, is a consumerist capitalist society. And therefore, what is dominant is a consumer freedom. Though it is exceptionally relevant, restricted to the middle class, but it's also true that spilling over and trickling down also to the rural areas and also to the lower class people. So what are the characteristic feature of this freedom? Consumer freedom. Whether I will buy Samsung or whether I will buy Hitachi, whether I will buy Kiaset, whether I will buy Nivea, what cereal I will choose, every day the TV opens, knocks into our home and displays the commodities in front of us. Them. It's your freedom. And that's exactly where you are free, because you are free to buy. So you were free to buy. That's dictated by the market. Is this the real freedom? Is this the authentic freedom? Because the choice is not yours. Choice is there. The choice is there. They're giving the choices. And we're just picking up from among the various choices. So, this is exactly the consumerist freedom. We think we are free. We think by opting for the commodity in the market, in the big bazaar, we are free. But actually, this freedom stalls. This freedom prevents the other qualitative exercise of different freedoms. This freedom basically keeps a check on those freedoms that might destabilize the society, that might destabilize the status quo. So in order to prevent that, we have been given this absolute so-called freedom of choice, infinite variations. Choose among these two, all these goods, but don't overstep, because that will jeopardize the whole status quo. Theodore Adorno, the great Frankfurt School theorist, once said, today's freedom is actually the freedom from body order and nothing else. I go to my last topic, the relation between freedom and COVID pandemic. What I want to say is that I don't think so, that absolutely a new radical beginning will happen from COVID, or new coordinates of freedom will emerge in the post-COVID situation. It never happened anywhere in history. If you go through Camus' the Plague, published in 1947, the same quarantine, the same kind of mad search for medicines, the same lockdown, and the same infinite suffering on the underprivileged. The same exists today even. So I don't think so. Let us look at it without being cynic, that it's a war between two species. A microbes entering and rampaging the most intelligent species. And we both share the same planet. There's no doubt about that. These wars, interspecies wars, have happened many times in history. And we have, as a human beings, we have suffered profound losses. But again, we believe the intelligent species, because of the intelligence, we come up with completely new kind of discoveries and new kinds of medicine that will defeat the microbes of the pandemic. So I do think that it will again be back to the normalcy. No radical new beginning, new coordinates of freedom, I don't actually hope for. I don't imagine even. There will become some kind of technical innovations, this webinar. Technical innovations like many other technical innovations might be, but basic fundamental grammar of life will be reverting back to the habitual mode. The only difference is that this time we have the satellite television, so we know how many deaths are there today exactly in New York, and the sole sort of opportunity of the webinars and the virtual platform which we are utilizing. But there is also fear that in neoliberal capitalism, capital is always hands in glove with technology. So they might easily utilize this opportunity to exploit more and more. Already has been evident in repealing of the labor laws in several states. This will give the opportunity again, might be, for extracting more and more. Now, all this we know, all this are fairly have been discussed a lot of times. I just want to raise another single issue. How far, what extent our demolition, damage, and destruction of the ecosystems are responsible for the COVID pandemic? I'm not saying of this, the sky is becoming pure and the air is pure and the dolphins, you can see dolphins here and there. The nature is coming back. We know that. That is due to lockdown. So I'm speaking of the specific reasons for COVID. It is a statement made on 6th July, 4 days back. UN has said that categorically, that COVID might be due to zoonotic diseases, which might come easily from the animals. The reason is very simple. We are continuously invading the habitats of the non-human species. Huge amount of human on the non-human habitats, making us so much close to the animal kingdom. And therefore, huge pressure of the resources, huge consumption, and therefore encroaching their habitats, plan to completely decimating them. And that is exactly the reason that we are contaminating. So it's not merely consumer freedom, but as well, this philosophical conception of free will is adequately responsible for that. Free will is only that of the human species. And other species are merely animal. They don't have freedom. They're enslaved by their animal nature. And we can do whatever we like by exercising our freedom because we have the free will. This is a typically speciesist ethic, the ethic of anthrocentricism, anthropocentric and speciesist, the domination, the decimation of one species over the other. And this might be hugely responsible for the generation of the pandemic, now which we are suffering from. Now I'll conclude. Let me conclude what I've said so far. 1, freedom is concrete. 2, freedom can only be thought in opposition to freedom in constraint. 3, freedom is differential across the societies and even within a single society. There is no universal subject for which the freedom is valid, but the subject is variable across gender, race, caste, sexual orientation, etc., etc. And the 4th, let modern age has become consumer freedom and nothing else, determined and dominated by the market. And finally, the free will, the so-called free will, is responsible for completely devastation and destruction of all other habitats, because this is only our planet and nobody will live. And that is which is responsible for the COVID epidemic. So I'll end up with this message like, so let us ask for some more freedom, of course, relatively more freedom, not in absolute sense. Qualitatively new freedoms that are not captured by the market or even the dominant morality of today. And then also let there be freedom for the other non-human species. Thank you.
Hello.
Hello, Shraddha, are you audible? Hello. Hello, Shraddha, are you audible?
Ah, sorry. Okay. Hello. Am I audible? Am I audible? Am I audible?
Yes, ma'am. Continue.
Sorry, I just had to go for a few minutes because someone was just here. Sorry for that. Sorry for the interruption. Thank you, sir. Thank you. That was very enlightening. Understand from the sociological perspective how the idea of human freedom serves as an inextricable thread in the fabric of human unfreedom, and vice versa. Can we have questions posted from the audience with regards to Mr. Bakchi's talk? I would like all of you to, if you have questions, to please address the questions and please write his name so that we can easily understand which question is for whom, and we can take out the question as the interactive session. Well, this is the end of the 3 technical sessions. We have heard all the 3 speakers, and what a memorable experience to have had the luck to listen to all 3 of the speakers on our panel. This was indeed the biggest gain of this webinar, to have the topic discussed and approached and interpreted by acclaimed scholars from 3 interdependent disciplines: English literature, philosophy, and sociology. I can feel our choice of making today's webinar more like an interactive exchange between mutually enriching academic disciplines was rewarding in itself. We will now head towards the interactive session where my dear colleague, Dr. Shulagna Chatterjee from the Department of Education will be moderating the Q&A session. Over to you, Shulagna.
Thank you, Shraddha. Am I audible? Hello. Am I audible?
Yes, you are audible.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Continue.
A very good evening to everyone. I consider it a great privilege that the organizing committee gave me the opportunity to act as a moderator in this webinar. Now we move towards the interactive session. A large number of participants have commented that the technical sessions were very informative. The chat box is overflowing with n number of comments and questions, but we have to consider some of them. At first, I'm going to start with Professor Goswami. Sir, are you there with us? Professor Goswami, are you there with us?
Yes, yes, I am here.
Am I audible to you, sir?
Yes, you are.
Okay, sir. One of our participants, Shubhashish Nibir, wants to know that if there is any possibility of Hegelian dialectics reflexively incorporated into the problematics of authentic freedom.
I think
Sir,
it is following for the scope. So I think we should.
This is, I think, this question.
uh,
Okay.
so Dr. Bhattacharya is going to answer.
Okay, can I?
Dr. Bhattacharya is going to answer this.
Okay.
Okay, sir.
Yeah, actually, as I've said, that whenever I am talking about freedom in the sense that to be and not to be, obviously the basis lies in the Hegelian dialectic. Hmm. That is identity difference and identity indifference. Okay, something is in simply the identity form, tautological form. X is X in this sense, and then there arises the negation of that second state. It is self-alienation of that. So that is difference. And finally, that identity indifference. That is, X is not only X, but both X and negation X. Now, these are the three stages we generally say, but later, after Hegel, it was explained that thesis, antithesis, synthesis. These terms were not used by Hegel himself. Hegel used the word understanding dialectic in this way, understanding dialectic, positive reason this way. So obviously, whenever we today talk about this kind of self-negation, self-nihilation, self-rejection, whether it is discussed by even Sartre or by even some postmodern thinkers, it is the basis lies in Hegelian dialectic. There is no doubt about it. Even after Marx, after Hegel, it was Marx who had borrowed it to Feuerbach. So that's true that when Sartre says that consciousness is something which is being for, and consciousness intends some object which is being in itself. For itself means which is incomplete, undecided. The source of freedom lies there, that I have freedom because I am free, because I'm incomplete, I'm undecided, I'm for itself. But an object like table, it is decided, it is complete, it has no possibility. Obviously, this has a Hegelian legacy so far as freedom in the sense of to be and not to be is concerned.
Thank you, sir. It would be interesting if Dr. Goswami expands on the potentiality and actuality of the pandemic as reflected through Aristotle's dynamics. Professor Goswami, are you there?
Yes, yes. So I believe that I spoke of Aramin's philosophy, Aristotle's dynamics and energia more than I should have. And I think I spoke sufficiently about this. Nevertheless, energia is actuality and dynamics is potential. And as Aramben makes it clear that potentiality has two modes. It may be translated into actuality, or it may not be translated into actuality. And therefore, Aristotle has conceived potentiality in terms of potentiality. And I discussed this with reference to the example of the choking of George Floyd by the policeman in the USA. That is, when he chokes him by placing his knee on his neck, he activates his potentiality of not removing his knee in order to work or give expression to state power. Therefore, these two concepts are intimately related. We may say, if you want to do something or be something, then you definitely are also not doing something else and being something else. So, I think there is sufficient next discussion of dynamics and potentiality. Significant is that Aramben, like neurologist, he also looks at the meaning of potenza as power, and thus links the concept of potentiality with the concept of power. And he thinks that human power has always been violent to other human beings. And if I can elaborate a little this with help from Professor Duhash now, as we spoke about the domination of the human species over the other species. So man not only violates the essential freedom of other human beings, but also violates the freedom of all other species as well. And therefore, the question is that whether we will exercise our freedom in the right direction or not. The idea that freedom is both freedom of good and evil. So in which direction we exercise our freedom, that is the question that Adam
Thank you, sir. There is one more question. Participant wants to know that what is middle class, one or a layered many, and are we to remain uncritical about one set of freedom against others, like hunger and state oppression? Sir, shall I repeat?
Who is this question addressed to? I think this should be addressed to Ivan Bhatt.
Okay, sir. Okay, sir. Sorry, sir. Okay. And my next question is for Professor Bhattacharya. Debosruba Chattopadhyay wants to know why we are condemned to be free and why aren't we privileged to be free?
Why, actually, it is this statement I have taken from Jean-Paul Sartre, Being and Nothingness, that I have tried to say initially that it has a long legacy since Kant, Nietzsche, and throughout this period in Western philosophy. We are condemned to be free in the sense that our consciousness is essentially nothingness, because it always reaches out to the external world. Why? Because consciousness is basically a gap. There's a deficiency, incompleteness. Therefore, it tries to be complete. It has got the inner tendency to be complete, to become complete. So in that sense, it always reaches out to the external world to intend some object. Therefore, we are essentially free because there is no other thing. We are not free not to be free in this sense that basically we are nothingness. And since basically we are nothingness, we have to make the choice. We have to decide. We have to assert our freedom in this way or that. Not that there are no limitations. There are limitations to our freedom. But as I've said, those limitations gain meaning from our choices, from our decisions. A blind person can, in spite of all his odds, can assert his freedom. I always give examples sometimes that there is a mountain. I always try to climb up the mountain, but I am not enough trained. But my intention is enough to assert myself that I want to do that. Maybe I might fail in this context. So since we are nothingness, it wants to always be complete. And without exercising freedom, we cannot be complete. That's all.
Thank you, sir. Mondrita Bhattacharya commented that we are condemned to be free, hence, Corona is not the culprit of our present plight.
As
What
I've
is your
said,
view?
yeah, as I've said, that pandemic is a threat for our existence. It's a crisis. And I have said that freedom is always accompanied by anguish. Freedom is always accompanied by forlornness. So without anguish, we cannot expect to be free. If we do not want to be free, there is no question of anguish. Now, pandemic is such a situation, it is a threat to our freedom, as we are housebound have said, many types of freedom. But it cannot completely undermine our freedom of intention. It cannot completely limit our freedom of intention. And moreover, as I've said, the entire situation seems to be incomprehensible. That is why I have introduced the notion of absurdity. It seems to be absurd. Really, how are we free? It's such a big challenge for our existence. Two reasons I have shown. So far as we have understood freedom as self-destructive bondage, not actual freedom. From nature, we have been alienated. From human being, we have been alienated. We have become, to use the Herbert Marcute's expression, one-dimensional man. Only consumption, only consume, more and more and more. There is no other dimension of our existence. It is the time to concentrate on those other dimensions of our existence, to understand freedom. And secondly, whenever we are facing more challenge, I have said that impenetrable absurdity, impenetrable anguish might lead us to sincerity. It is the time for us to be sincere in view of this type of challenge, in view of this type of crisis.
Thank you, sir. Shayanti Talukdar commented that too much of freedom led us to the corona-stricken world, pandemic causing devastation.
Yeah, that's
What's
true.
your
That
view?
I've said. Yeah, actually, I have said just in the last answer and in my lecture, I have said that definitely that there is a misconception of education, there is also a misconception of freedom. It is obviously true. And throughout the ages, we have been trained to understand freedom in that fashion, that freedom means to have more and more. Freedom means excuse of desires. Freedom means to live at the mercy of wants. We have understood freedom in that way. Internally, externally, we never speak, we are spoken. We never decide, we are decided. All the needs we understand during this pandemic. I have written in one my paper regarding our economy, that so far before this pandemic, we could not determine our needs. What were our needs? We have been shown our needs. Now in pandemic, we are able to determine our needs. We understand what actually we need. We are able to understand now. So we should focus on that aspect of life. Then only we can properly exercise our freedom, and freedom can be free from that type of misunderstanding.
Okay, sir. Lalita Agarwal suggested that the misuse and abuse of freedom led us to this situation. Is this true?
Definitely, misuse of freedom is there. Of course, there is misuse of freedom. Misuse in the sense that misconception about freedom. That I have told time and again. I have told that there has been misconception about freedom. And many thinkers have insisted on this point, that we have become a being who always wants to have, never wants to be, never wants to become. So so far as I think who has asked the question, she is from philosophy. I know her. She is from philosophy teacher.
Maybe, sir, maybe.
Yes, yes. Let me tell one thing, that in our neo system, it has been said that we want to. So there was that we want to be upakaronoban. Amra upakaronban hote chai. This is our understanding of freedom. This has been given to us. The more materials, the more factors, the more elements you have, you are free. That sense of freedom is there. So obviously misconception, misuse of freedom, we have not been able to understand, because my freedom is very much related with others' freedom. Actually, I am reminded of to this question, which was said by Tagore in his Religion of Man, that the lack of freedom is essentially the spirit of alienation. There is no doubt about it that freedom is misconceived in the sense that we have become alienated. So that's true. I agree with her.
Okay, sir. Thank you. One of our participant, Kabir Pasa, wants to know that aren't we caught up in the idea freedom as is branded or solid, and we chase after it for our whole life?
To me, this question,
He wants to know that aren't we caught up in the idea of freedom as is branded and solid, and we chase after it for our whole life?
Yeah, actually, what he or she wants to know, I don't get the question very clearly, but as far as I understand, that is, yes, to some extent, that is true, that we actually build up something. And to this question, I would like to say that a kind of reality we have developed, which is being understood as hyper reality. Even the postmodern philosophy, postmodern literature, this is called to some extent the hyper reality. We have built up a world of reality which is not the actual reality, but which seems to be brighter, which seems to be more forceful than the actual world, and we are dragged from this actual world to that world of hyper reality, and therefore before us there is a very bright picture, perhaps which has no ground. Then we are continuously attracted to that reality, and we are simply getting alienated from our actual reality. So again, I have said that during this pandemic situation, we must it is the time to get rid of this kind of misunderstanding of situation.
Thank you, Professor Bhattacharya. Now I move on to Professor Bagchi. Sir, are you there?
Yeah.
Okay, sir. Sir, am I audible to you? Okay. Sir, one of our participants wants to know whether a new kind of freedom emerge in the new normal situation in the post-pandemic era. Sir, shall I repeat the question? Bibhash, sir?
Yeah. Could you please repeat the question?
Okay. Whether a new kind of freedom emerge in the new normal situation in the post-pandemic era.
See, I have made clear my argument that I don't think that after the pandemic, there will be new qualitative emergence of new freedoms. I'm not that hopeful as well. Might be there will be some technical adjustment, might be some kind of technical innovations, and of course there'll be medical innovations. But entirely what Alain Badiou would say, a new kind of beginning for human history, like like new kinds of transvaluation of values or new kind of exercise of freedom. I don't think that is, I'm not hopeful about that. I'm not hopeful about that. But, well, of course, what has been so much told about is that we might be more careful about exploiting nature.
There is another question for you. What is middle class? One or a layered many? And are we to remain uncritical about one set of freedom against others, like hunger and state oppression?
Yes, that's a very interesting question. I was supposed to say about that, but I missed that. Middle class, sociologically speaking, is multi-layered. A broad definition of middle class means that those people, it's a general definition, those people who are engaged in white collar employment, not doing manual labor. I take that as a broad stratum of middle class who are not engaged, who are only engaged in kinds of mental labor and manual labor. This is the response to your first question. The second question is, of course, completely class divided society and people dying on the platform and the child tucking the mother's sari, dropped down dead after traveling for 200 kilometers, and we enjoyed tikka biryani within our home during the lockdown period, really points out to the tremendous kind of disparity of the quanta of freedom enjoyed by the middle class, the upper middle classes, and the working class and the lower class. Number one. So there is always a difference, of course. Number two, personally, I believe that the state is hands and glove with the upper classes. I do believe that this Indian state is a state of the rich. This Indian state is a state of the property classes. And therefore, they exactly did nothing. Absolutely did nothing. Because a very simple fact is that this state represents the state of the property classes. So the fundamental and basic freedom, absolutely I agree with you, is a freedom, as I say, embodied in my concrete embodied and absolutely a spirit. That spirit, the freedom from hunger, is a very, very basic question. It has to be addressed. And this particular freedom is completely nullified by the state, and it's natural they will nullify that because they represent the property class.
Thank you, sir. One of my colleague wants to know that will the pandemic endanger a paradigm shift from our overemphasis on personal freedom to state-defined freedom? Can this anxiety and fear of pandemic, which will quite obviously stay with us as a post-traumatic stress, can be misused by the states to execute their fascist experiments in the future?
Is it meant for me?
Sir, it is a general question. If you want to answer, you can.
Should I pass to
Okay, no problem, sir.
source from philosophy? It's related to the question of angst of freedom, etc., etc.
Okay, it's a for
just one point I would like to say that because this is the question is making the rounds. I do not think that the freedom we have is more. I do think that we're very lazy. We must have many, many, many more freedoms to emerge. A negative abuse of freedom, that is pertinent. Our freedom to bring catastrophes over nature is absolutely condemnable. But I do find, and that is sometimes it is spoken of that we have large degrees of freedom. On the contrary, I think that we have too little degrees of freedom. We will be having or should have more and more degrees of freedom so that to take the project of life on our hand, after all, life is an individual project.
Thank you, sir. Professor Bhattacharya wants to add something to this? Sir, please unmute yourself. You are not audible.
Oh, no. Sorry. Yeah, I agree
Okay.
with Professor Bakshi on some issues, definitely. Actually, if we look back to history, we see that history of freedom is closely associated with the history of relationship. And that relationship now at this stage is at stake. There is no doubt about it. So definitely we need more and more and more freedom. There is no doubt about it. But I have always insisted that before this time there was discussion, this situation. The post-pandemic situation that is supposed to come. I don't know when it will be really post-pandemic. But when we have been considering that our position, our freedom is actually, as I've said, that type of self-destructive bondage, not true actual freedom. And forget about my philosophical position of ontology or existential. Just think about the freedom as we see in the external world, in society, in state. That remote and inaccessible authority, I have said, that is consumerism, consumer capitalism, that seems to gain more power during this pandemic, even after this pandemic. And economists are talking about that type of disaster capitalism, which seems to gain more and more and more power on the basis of technological development and all this. Of course, there are some researches are going on. Even medical science is also getting replaced by medical industry. Okay. So therefore, we are supposed to suffer in that way, and freedom is getting, I should say, reduced to just a point. So that is why at the end of my lecture, I have insisted on the notion of sincerity. We have to be sincere, we have to be committed, because the state, as there has been a happy marriage between state, capitalism, intellectualism, and this is actually causing a lot of threat to our freedom. So unless we are becoming more and more sincere, the days I am also not very hopeful in this context.
Okay. Thank you, sir. As time is running short, we have to delimit the discussion here. We are now at the end of our interactive session. I think the session was very valuable to the participants. Thanks to our guests for their patience. I think around 250 participants are being active in today's webinar, and that's a gain, a genuine gain for us. Now it's over to Nivedita Karmakar, Assistant Professor, Department of English, who will deliver the final vote of thanks. Nivedita, it's over to you.
Am I audible?
Yeah, you're audible.
Thank you, Dr. Suloghnal Chatterjee. It has been a very fascinating and engaging discussion. It's my privilege to propose the vote of thanks on behalf of the webinar organizing committee. First, let me express my gratitude to our resource persons, Dr. Niranjan Goswami, Dr. Pelikan Bhattacharya, and Mr. Bibhash Bagchi. We offer our sincere thanks to our principal, sir, Dr. Saroj Kumar Chattopadhyay, for being our patron. Then the college administration, faculty members, non-teaching staff, and our beloved students richly deserve our gratitude, and I offer the same. I thank all the participants from all over the nation for showing their immense enthusiasm and support. My heartfelt thanks to my co-convener and friend Dr. Shraddha Nag, Assistant Professor, Department of English. And once again, I thank you all for your attention. Over to Dr. Shraddha Nag, the moderator.
Thank you.
Shraddha?
Thank you. Thank you, Nivedita. Am I audible?
Yes, you are audible.
Audible? Okay. Thank you so much, my co-convener and very dear friend and colleague, Nivedita. It has been wonderful to co-convene this thing with you. We have come to the very end of this webinar. It's been a wonderful experience for me, and I hope it has been the same with you all. Were we truly free before the pandemic, when we could go anywhere, meet anyone, do almost anything without having to worry about being intentional? Or the pandemic and the consequent physical caging has contributed to a more conscious practice and questioning of that conscious practice of freedom, contributed to a recalibration of ourselves to consider the fact that my freedom could pretty often mean another person's or another living organism's unfreedom. There is, however, no denying the fact that it is with us introspecting and re-introspecting and questioning our introspections, nurturing the freedom to doubt our own age-old idea of freedom, that we could truly approach this concept of free will, the dynamics between the individual and the free will and the human practice of freedom. These are some of the things that are going on in my mind, and I'm going to think about it. I think everyone has got some great amount of inward thought. And we hope to have your support and presence the very next time we organize something like this. Everyone is being impatient for the feedback form, I can understand. So with my principal sir's permission, and on behalf of the organizing committee and Chandraketugarh Sahidullah Smriti Mahavidyalaya, I conclude today's webinar, and I sign off on behalf of my college. Thank you once again, everyone. Stay safe, stay protected, and may we see better days. God bless.
Hello, ma'am. May I enter?
Yes, you can end.
Okay. Thank you so much.
ফিডব্যাক লিংকটা আরেকবার একটু দিয়ে দিন সুজন বাবু, ফিডব্যাক লিংকটা আরেকবার একটু দিয়ে দিন।
ম্যাম ফিডব্যাক লিংক ইউটিউবে দেওয়া হয়ে গেছে ম্যাম।
হ্যাঁ হ্যাঁ, আমি গ্রুপে দিয়ে দিয়েছি। চ্যাট বক্সে আরেকবার একটু দিয়ে দিন আপনাদের এন্ড থেকে। ওকে,
দারুণ হয়েছে।